David Lammy, in opposition, I think you've discussed this before, Ed, has been quite careful to build alliances with people that may not necessarily share his political direction. For example, J.D. Vance, which may help now to smooth the waters, because, of course, nobody can forget what David Lammy called Donald Trump. What was it? A racist, woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath and a tyrant in a toupee. Now, you can't get away from that, but maybe the alliances that David Lammy has been building will help to calm waters when it comes to Donald Trump.
There you go. Let's talk about Keir Starmer. We discussed it earlier with Patrick Maguire from Times Radio. He had a good trip to the US after a tricky conference. It's amazing how quickly the government has got into trouble so clearly. What did you think? How did you think the US went for him, Miranda?
Well, I've also just got back from Liverpool from the very damp and dour Labour Party conference. So, yeah, I had exactly the same thought when I saw him and David Lammy zooming off, and Annalise Dodds. Anyone who had who has a brief that's remotely relevant to the UN got the hell out of Liverpool pretty much as soon as they could, I think. It's absolutely true. Towards the sort of dying days of an administration, you do tend to see prime ministers taking great pleasure in the status, the role, a feeling of mission in the world that they can get from striding around the world stage. It's obviously really important, though, for a new prime minister to go and make those relationships, particularly with our major allies and at a time of huge international crisis. We've got two burning fires, in Ukraine and in the Middle East. So, I mean, it's good that he's there and participating, but I know exactly what you mean. He's been a little bit tetchy and grumpy in the UK, hasn't he? Faced with a lot of awkward questions about the running of Downing Street as well as the Freebie-gate questions. So you sense that it might have been a bit of a relief to go and speak to his peers, as it were. And by which I don't mean people like you, Ed. I mean,
No, it's
other
true.
other government leaders.
Most prime ministers concede privately that the most enjoyable part of the job is the foreign affairs role, where you get to hang out with other world leaders. I mean, Carolyn, Quinn, what interests me about Keir Starmer is that I agree with a lot of his approach. I obviously do think we need a much better relationship with the EU. And I liked his speech at the UN, which basically said that Britain is in no position really to lecture the world, but we're still a player and we should listen more and engage more forensically, I guess.
I don't know whether we're looking at a significant change in foreign policy, though, are we? Because all prime ministers from the UK aspire to play a significant role on the world stage. So that's nothing new. And international crises are just part of the job at the moment. As Miranda says, there are these key issues that need the allies to pull together on. He's the new kid on the block, I suppose. He wants to maintain and develop those alliances with those allies. But, with the global order as it is, Keir Starmer really has little choice over who to work with and who to challenge. So this was his moment to show how strong he could be on the world stage. I don't think it was a moment like Robin Cook declaring that there would be an ethical dimension to foreign policy. But nevertheless, Keir Starmer will have enjoyed mixing it with the great and the good, and also expressing continued support for Ukraine. As Miranda said, interesting as well when it comes to those conversations behind the scenes with Donald Trump. I wonder how much Ukraine featured and how much of a word Keir Starmer got in.
Well, that's right. Sorry, Miranda.
I was just going to say, they have come up with a new phrase, haven't they, which is quite interesting: progressive realism. So as Carolyn said, no return to the Robin Cook phrase that then got them in trouble anytime anything unethical, was done by the UK in foreign policy. But progressive realism sort of gives you quite a lot of out clauses, doesn't it? Because you can pick a moment to be realistic and pick a moment to claim that you're being progressive. But yeah, they do seem to want to fashion a new approach. And that David Lammy speech as well, didn't you think was interesting? Where he tried to sort of argue, as a black man, he understood the threats of imperialism, and that Russia was clearly up to an imperialist project, which was an interesting use of his own, physical presence, I suppose, for rhetorical ends. I thought that was quite effective.
David Lammy, in opposition, I think you've discussed this before, Ed, has been quite careful to build alliances with people that may not necessarily share his political direction. For example, J.D. Vance, which may help now to smooth the waters, because, of course, nobody can forget what David Lammy called Donald Trump. What was it? A racist, woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath and a tyrant in a toupee. Now, you can't get away from that, but maybe the alliances that David Lammy has been building will help to calm waters when it comes to Donald Trump.
I mean, I think it's a good thing that Keir Starmer met Donald Trump. I think it's, he represents Britain, and it's important that Britain has a relationship with somebody who could be president in a matter of weeks.
There's a 50-50 chance, isn't there? He could be the president. So, you've got to build alliances.
It's a two-horse race. It's interesting, isn't it, actually? I thought it hadn't occurred to me, Miranda Green, is actually the reaction of his party to him meeting Donald Trump. I haven't really picked up anything of anyone sort of criticising him for going to see Donald Trump.
Well, it's a sort of Richter grin, isn't it? You're quite right. It's entirely necessary for the UK Prime Minister to have a relationship with the President of the US, whichever one it turns out to be. But he is not loved by anyone on the sort of progressive centre-left side of politics, or indeed anyone in the progressive centre-right of politics either. But you have to deal with what the electorates of your democratic allies deliver to you, don't you? So you don't, as Carolyn quite rightly said, have a choice. I mean, I think something that's going to be perhaps more interesting is how Starmer and Lammy decide to deal with those non-democratic governments that also, cause a lot of unhappiness on the left. I mean, previous governments, Cameron and Osborne years, there was a lot of unhappiness with how close they wanted to be to the Chinese government, for example. Even whispers from the royal family about that relationship. It's tricky because you get discontent at home, and obviously the whole Gaza issue is much more complicated for a Labour leader now, with those 5 independent MPs on the left. A lot of those seats having been lost by Labour MPs because of support for Israel.
Isn't it interesting as well how our focus shifts? As you mentioned China there, that was at one point the biggest threat to the UK. Russia as well. Now we're looking at other issues. It's fascinating the way that we have to be across, or at least the leaders have to be across all of these issues. And dealing with somebody like Donald Trump, who we know is, how should we say, quixotic, and he might say one thing 1 minute and turn on a sixpence the next. So although he's saying Keir Starmer, I think he's very nice. I think he's very popular. Who knows what he might say in a few minutes' time? And it's notable that while he was praising Keir Starmer, Donald Trump was also saying Nigel Farage is a great fella, and he deserved to have more seats in the general election. Reform UK, of course, got 5 seats from 14%, and Miranda, you'll know that the Lib Dems got 12% of the vote and got 72 MPs. So there are grievances that no doubt Nigel Farage has mentioned to Donald Trump, and he's nursing those.
I love the idea of Nigel Farage and Donald Trump having a drink and discussing alternative voting systems. That's positively surreal. But yeah, I guess he must have complained to the president about that.
I mean, I do love hearing Donald Trump commenting on the British political system, and you can tell exactly where he's got it from.